Big one just dropped, mate. Every year APRA releases its performance test results, usually around late August, and it gives us a pretty good snapshot of how Australia's super products are actually performing. Now whether you're with an industry fund, a retail fund, or you're managing your own SMSF, this stuff still matters. Because here's the thing, the fund sitting at number 1 today might actually be the wrong choice for you. And by the end of this video you'll know exactly why. That's kind of how super works in Australia. Rankings move around, fees quietly change, funds merge with other funds, and no one sends you a message saying, "Hey mate, something changed." You just keep working, your employer keeps making contributions, and you assume everything's ticking along nicely. Then 5 or 10 years later you compare balances with a mate who started around the same time as you, and suddenly you're wondering, hang on, how did theirs grow so much faster? So in this video, I just want to walk you through what actually separates the better performing products from the ones falling behind, who those performance numbers really apply to and who they don't. And then we'll get into the quieter stuff like fees and insurance, because that's where a lot of people lose money without even noticing. By the end, you'll know where your fund stands, whether it's genuinely underperforming or just going through a rough patch, and what questions are worth asking before you even think about switching. Quick heads up before we jump in, I'm not a financial advisor, and none of this is personal financial advice because I don't know your situation, your age, or how much risk you're comfortable with. Think of this as the start of the conversation, not the finish line. If you need advice that's specific to you, that's where a licensed financial advisor comes in. Right, let's start with performance because that's the number everyone looks at first. And honestly, it's also the one most people misunderstand. Here's how these performance comparisons actually work. Every investment option reports returns over 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, and so on. Most people look at whichever number catches their eye and call it a day. But that 1-year return on its own doesn't tell you much because super is a long-term game. A fund might have had one rough year simply because of the mix of investments it holds, and that doesn't automatically make it a bad option. Since 2021, APRA has been running its performance test to see whether certain super products are meeting their investment benchmarks. If a product fails once, the trustee has to write to members, usually within 28 days, letting them know the product failed and that they might want to consider their options. If it fails 2 years in a row, that product can't accept new members anymore. So if you ever get one of those letters, don't ignore it. It's not marketing, it's something they're required to send. Now here's where people often get caught out. The APRA performance test doesn't cover every investment option, and it doesn't apply to SMSFs either because they're self-managed. It mainly covers APRA-regulated products like MySuper options and trustee-directed products. So if you're in an APRA-regulated fund, don't just look at the fund's name and assume everything's fine. Check whether your specific product appears on APRA's underperformance list. That's what actually matters. And while we're at it, don't compare a growth option in one fund with a balanced option in another. They're built differently, they take different levels of risk, and they're designed for different types of investors. So just because one option tops a list doesn't automatically mean it's the right one for you. Another thing I hear all the time is that industry funds always beat retail funds, or that the cheapest fund must be the best. Honestly, it's not that simple. Plenty of industry funds have performed really well over the years, but performance still comes down to the specific product you're invested in, not the label on the front. Some retail funds have improved a lot while some industry funds have had disappointing periods too. It's never about picking a side, it's about picking the right product for your situation. So what should you actually check? It's pretty simple. First, if you're in an APRA-regulated fund, see whether your specific product is on the underperformance list. That takes about 30 seconds. Second, make sure you're actually invested in the right option for your age and your risk tolerance because switching funds without fixing that often doesn't change much at all. Now performance gets all the headlines, but when I really looked into this, the thing that surprised me most wasn't performance, it was fees and insurance. Here's something a lot of people don't realize. Even a difference of 0.5% in annual fees can make a huge difference over 30 or 40 years. Imagine two people, both 30 years old, same salary, same contributions, same investment returns. The only difference is one person pays 0.5% more in fees every year. Over time, that gap can easily turn into tens of thousands of dollars. Neither person made better investment decisions. One fund was simply charging a bit more the whole time. Then there's insurance. Most super funds automatically include life and disability insurance, and for a lot of people that's genuinely valuable. But those premiums come out of your balance every week whether you actually need that cover or not. And it's worth knowing that insurance isn't included in APRA's performance test. So a product can pass the performance test, but still be costing you more than it should because of insurance. If you've got multiple super accounts from old jobs, you might even be paying for the same insurance 2 or 3 times without realizing it. If you're an employee, one of the easiest wins is checking whether you've consolidated those old accounts. That alone can save you money without changing a single investment. And if you're self-employed or running your own business, it's worth checking whether the insurance inside your super still matches your current situation, because what made sense 5 years ago might not make much sense today. And that's really the theme with all of this. Super doesn't tap you on the shoulder when something changes. It doesn't send a notification saying your product failed the APRA test or that you're paying for insurance you no longer need. The people who stay on top of it usually have more options. The people who don't often only find out years later. When fixing it becomes much harder. Before we wrap up, there's one last thing that almost nobody checks, and it can undo everything else if it's wrong. Just make sure your details are up to date. Your contact information, your email address, and especially your beneficiary nomination. None of those things show up in a performance table or a fee comparison, but they're exactly the sort of details that can cause real headaches later on. So if you want the quick version, here it is. If you're in an APRA-regulated fund, check whether your product is on the underperformance list, make sure you're invested in the right option for your age and risk level, check your fees and insurance, especially if you've got old accounts, and make sure all your details are current. 3 simple checks, maybe 15 minutes all up, and you'll have a much better idea of where you stand. The funny thing about Super is you almost never know immediately whether you've made the right decision. There's no instant feedback. You usually find out 10 or 20 years later when your balance either thanks you for paying attention or reminds you that you didn't. So if you know someone who's never actually checked their Super, and let's be honest, that's a lot of people, send this video their way. A quick 15-minute check today is a whole lot easier than trying to fix years of neglect later on. And if you checked your own Super while watching this, let me know in the comments what surprised you the most. There's a good chance your answer will encourage someone else to check theirs too.